girl was forced to marry a vampire as sacrifice. Cool CEO fell in love with her and saved her. Elara stood at the edge of the cliff, the wind tugging at her dark hair like invisible fingers. Below, the kingdom of Eldoria stretched endlessly, its silver rivers reflecting the pale light of the moon. She had always thought of the world as wide and free, but tonight it felt like a cage closing in, every shadow whispering of the fate that awaited her. Her heart hammered in her chest, a frantic rhythm she could not quiet. The council had made their decision. She had been chosen, the sacrifice. Chosen to marry Kale, the vampire lord who ruled the night with power and fear. His name alone carried the weight of centuries, and the stories of his cruelty were spoken in hushed tones by trembling servants. But the council had not cared about fear. They cared about survival. The kingdom was cursed. A dark magic, old as the mountains, had stirred in the forests. Crops were failing. Rivers ran thick with red mud. Children fell ill with fever that no healer could cure. Only one thing could stop the curse: a blooded pact, the joining of mortal and immortal. And so, the young noblewoman was offered to the shadowed lord. Elara's fingers trembled around the hem of her dress. She did not want to die. She did not want to become part of some legend that began with fear and ended in sorrow. But in her chest, a stubborn flame of courage refused to die. If she were to face Kale, it would be with eyes wide open, not bowed in submission. The carriage that would take her to the vampire's fortress waited, its black wheels silent on the cobbled stones. As she stepped inside, the air seemed heavier, charged with anticipation and dread. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, as though warning her to turn back. But she did not. She could not. The journey through the night was long, passing through forests that seemed alive with unseen eyes. Wolves howled in the distance, and shadows stretched unnaturally, moving as if they had purpose. Elara pressed her hands to the seat, listening to the pounding of her own heart, each beat a drum of fear and defiance. When the fortress finally emerged from the mist, it rose like a dark cathedral, towers reaching toward the sky like fingers clawing at the stars. Its walls were black stone, slick with moisture, and lit only by crimson torches that flickered with an unholy fire. A chill ran down Elara's spine as the gates swung open, silent but welcoming her into the domain of the eternal. Inside, the air was cooler, scented with old wood and a faint metallic tang she could not name. Shadows clung to every corner, moving with life of their own, and there, at the top of the grand staircase, he waited. Kale! He was taller than any man she had ever seen, with shoulders broad and strong and hair as dark as midnight. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, and they pierced her as if they could read every thought she had tried to hide. He did not bow, did not smile. He simply studied her, the way one might examine a rare jewel. "You are late," he said, his voice deep and smooth, carrying a weight that made her knees feel weak. I was not sure," she said, her own voice small against his presence. I am ready now." Kale's lips curved slightly, but it was not a smile. It was a shadow of amusement, a flicker of curiosity. "Ready," he repeated, and it sounded like a question. He stepped down the stairs, his movements fluid, almost predatory. "Do you know what this means?" Elara swallowed hard. "That I serve the kingdom. That I—" she faltered. How could she explain the storm in her chest, The fear, the anger, the strange pull she already felt toward this man she was meant to hate. That I marry you. Kale's gaze softened just slightly. Marry me, he echoed, as if tasting the words for the first time. A mortal and an immortal. One binds the other. A dangerous choice. Elara felt a shiver of understanding. She was not just entering a marriage, she was stepping into a world of shadows and power she could barely imagine. And yet, something about him, the way he held himself, the quiet authority that made every corner of the room tremble with his presence, made her heart race in ways she did not expect. They moved to the ritual chamber, a grand hall lit by floating lanterns that glowed like captured stars. The walls were etched with runes that pulsed faintly, and the air hummed with magic. Kale gestured for her to stand in the center, and as she did, she could feel the weight of his gaze settle upon her like a cloak. "Do not be afraid," he said, and there was a strange gentleness in his tone that made her chest tighten. "The pact does not end with fear. You have a choice, even now." "I?" She hesitated, the truth trembling on her lips. "I do not want to be afraid. But I do not know what I am." Kale reached toward her, but did not touch. Instead, he let his presence surround her, a warmth that was both terrifying and comforting. "Then you will learn. You will discover who you are and who I am. And perhaps, in the darkness, you will find light." The ritual began. Magic swirled around them, a storm of silver and crimson. Elara felt it seep into her skin, cold and electric. Shadows danced along the walls, whispering in voices she could not understand. The curse of the kingdom stirred in the air, writhing like a living thing. Suddenly a scream echoed from the far side of the hall. The spell faltered, and the shadows surged forward, wild and uncontrolled. Elara stumbled, fear striking her like a blade. She tried to move, but the magic held her in place. And then, through the chaos, Kale stepped forward. He moved with impossible speed, his hand gripping her wrist as he pulled her behind him. Shadows lunged, twisting and clawing, but he held them back, his own power flaring like fire in the night. Elara's breath came in short, sharp bursts as she realized the truth. He was saving her. Not just from the ritual, but from death itself. Kale's eyes met hers, and in that instant everything changed. The fear, the anger, the sense of being trapped, they all shifted. She saw not a monster, but a being who carried centuries of loneliness and pain, and she knew, somehow, that he was just as bound by the pact as she was. When the storm of magic finally subsided, the hall was silent except for their breathing. Kale's grip on her wrist lingered, strong but not cruel. "The curse is alive," he said, voice low. "It tests us. It will not rest until it is fed. But tonight you live. Because of me." Elara's chest heaved, and she found herself speaking before she could stop it. Why save me?" Kale's storm-gray eyes softened again, a hint of vulnerability breaking through the armor of centuries. "Because even a shadow can choose to protect the light." Elara did not understand all the words, but she felt their meaning. Something deep inside her stirred, a fragile spark of trust, of connection. She was still afraid, still uncertain, but a seed had been planted. Perhaps in this darkness she could survive. Perhaps even find something like hope. As they left the ritual chamber, the first rays of dawn broke across the horizon, touching the black spires of the fortress with gold. Elara felt the weight of the world pressing down, but also something lighter, a strange promise in the air. Kale walked beside her, silent now, but not distant. The night had passed, but its shadows lingered, weaving between them like threads of fate, and though neither spoke, both felt the unspoken truth. The pact had begun, and it would change everything. The kingdom still trembled under the curse, and dangers lay ahead, waiting to test courage and heart alike. But for the first time, Elara did not feel alone. The storm of destiny was rising, and she was standing in its center. And Kale, the vampire lord, the shadow of legend, had become her unexpected protector. The fortress of Kale was alive with shadows. Every hallway whispered secrets. Every corner hid centuries of history. Elara wandered through the dark halls, her fingers brushing the cold stone walls. The air was heavy, carrying a mix of smoke, old wood, and something she could not name. A faint scent of iron and old magic. The castle was beautiful in a dark way, like a painting of night itself. Kale followed her silently, his presence behind her a constant weight she could not ignore. He never touched her, not yet, but she felt the pull of his eyes, like invisible threads pulling at her heart. She hated that it made her cheeks warm. She hated that it made her feel alive in a way fear alone could not. "You do not need to be afraid here," Kale said, his voice low, echoing through the stone corridors. "But you will need to learn the rules of this place. Shadows obey me. They will not obey you. And magic does not bend for anyone, mortal or immortal." "I will try," Elara replied, her voice small, almost lost in the vastness of the hall. "But everything is so strange here. I do not understand." Kale stopped, turning toward her. His eyes were stormy, and for a moment, Elara thought she saw something like regret, or maybe longing, hidden in their depths. "Understanding is earned," he said, "not given. And even then, some truths will remain hidden." Elara wanted to ask, what truths? But fear and curiosity battled within her. Instead, she nodded, her hand clenching her dress. She would survive. Somehow, she would survive. And maybe, somehow, she would understand him too. The first days in the fortress were quiet and tense. Kale never forced her to obey, but every movement he made, every glance reminded her that she was in his world now. She could not escape. She could not hide. And yet, she noticed small things. The way he paused before opening a door, as if he feared what might be inside, or the rare moments when he let his gaze soften when he looked at her. One evening, as twilight spilled like molten gold through the tall windows, Elara found herself alone in the garden. It was a strange garden, overgrown but beautiful, with black roses and silver leaves that shimmered in the fading light. She walked among the flowers, touching petals, breathing in the sweet, bitter fragrance, and tried to calm the storm inside her. "You should not wander alone." Kale's voice came from the shadows, smooth but firm. She turned to see him standing beneath the archway, his silhouette framed by the last light of day. "I am not afraid," she said, though her voice betrayed her. "You should be," he replied, stepping closer. The shadows moved with him, swirling like smoke. "This world is not kind to mortals, especially not to those bound by blood to immortals." Elora met his gaze. She did not know if it was courage or recklessness that made her speak. "Then I will learn to be stronger. I do not want to be helpless." For a long moment, Kale said nothing. Then he nodded slightly, a gesture almost human in its softness. "Perhaps you will," he said. "Perhaps you are not like the others." The air between them seemed to shift. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Alara felt it deep in her chest. She realized with a start that her heart beat faster when he was near. And Kale, she thought, must feel it too. The faint tension, the quiet pull of something dangerous and impossible. Days passed. The curse of the kingdom was not idle. News arrived that fields near the capital had turned black overnight, that the river had overflowed with strange red water, and that a cold mist had killed crops in the northern valleys. Elara heard the reports and felt fear gnawing at her chest. But Kale's presence was a shield she could not explain. She wanted to hate him for the world he represented, for the power he wielded, but instead she felt fascination. One night, Kale summoned her to the council chamber. The vampire elders were there, their faces pale, their eyes sharp and judgmental. Elara felt her stomach tighten. They did not look at her as a person. They looked at her as a threat, a key, a weapon. "You have been brought here to serve as more than a bride," one elder said, voice echoing like glass. "Your presence stabilizes Kale's power, but the bond must be tested. If you falter, if your heart cannot withstand the weight of the pact, he will not survive, and neither will you." I will not fail," she said, though her voice trembled. Kale stepped beside her, his shadow falling over her like protection. "You will not be alone," he said softly, almost too softly to be heard over the elders' scrutiny. "We face this together." The council murmured, displeased. Kale ignored them, turning his stormy eyes to Alara, and in that gaze, she felt a strange comfort. A bond had begun. Not just the ritual, not just the magic, but something unspoken, fragile, and powerful. After the council meeting, Kale led her through the fortress. The corridors were quieter now, the shadows thinner. "The elders will test you," he said, his voice careful. "They will try to frighten you, to break you. You must remember, they do not control you." "I do not control you. Your will is your own." I do not know if I am strong enough," Elara admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Kale stopped, lifting her chin with a gentle hand. The touch was brief, but it made her heart leap. "Strength is not measured by the absence of fear," he said. "It is measured by facing it. By moving forward even when every part of you wants to run." She looked into his eyes, stormy and gray, and for the first time, she did not see a monster. She saw a man, eternal, burdened, and yet capable of caring, and she realized, with a shiver, that she wanted him to care. The next day, Kale brought her to the training hall, a vast chamber filled with mirrors, swords, and the faint hum of magic in the air. "You must learn to defend yourself," he said. "The world will not be gentle, and neither will the curse. But knowledge, skill, and courage, they can be shields." Alara picked up a practice sword, its weight unfamiliar in her hands. Caleb demonstrated the movements, his body a blur of precision and grace. She struggled at first, her arms aching, her steps unsteady. But Cale's eyes never left her, guiding, correcting, encouraging. There was a rhythm to their movements, a silent dialogue in each strike and block. As days turned to weeks, a strange familiarity grew between them. The fortress no longer felt entirely like a prison. Shadows were still everywhere, but with Cale they seemed less threatening. He shared stories, rarely, cautiously, of centuries past, of battles and betrayals, of loneliness that stretched longer than any mortal could imagine. Hilara listened, captivated, and sometimes she would catch him staring at her, just as she stared at him. The air between them was heavy with words unspoken. Every brush of his hand, every shared glance was loaded with meaning neither dared voice. One evening, a terrible wind swept through the fortress. The curse stirred again, restless and cruel. Shadows crept along the walls, whispering threats that chilled Elara to the bone. She tried to steady her breath, to calm the panic rising inside her. Kale appeared beside her, and in a single motion drew her close, shielding her from the darkness. "Do not fight it alone," he said, his voice low and urgent. "You are stronger than you know. But even the strongest cannot stand without help." She could feel the warmth of his body, the strength he offered, and a rush of emotion she had never expected. Fear, yes, but also trust. And perhaps something more, something dangerous, something she could not yet name. The night passed, the storm of shadows receding, but the memory lingered. Elara could not sleep, her mind replaying the closeness, the intensity of the moment. And Kale black. Kale moved through the halls as if nothing had happened, but she could see it in his eyes. The spark of connection, the unspoken promise that the bond between them was growing stronger with each passing day. As dawn broke, casting pale light across the fortress, a messenger arrived, breathless and terrified. "The northern villages?" he gasped. "The curse. It has returned, stronger than ever. Crops destroyed. Rivers boiling red, and people disappearing." Elora felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. The world outside was falling apart. And Kale's face hardened, the calm mask slipping just enough to reveal the centuries of worry he carried for those he protected. "You see now," he said softly, almost to himself, "why this bond exists, why you are here. We are not safe, none of us. And yet, we endure, because we must." Elara's hand brushed against his, unintentionally, and he did not pull away. For a first small, fleeting moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them, a mortal and an immortal. A bond born of fear and duty, growing into something neither fully understood, and yet, as they prepared to face the coming threat together, Alara could not shake the feeling that the curse was no longer merely a test. It was a challenge, a force that would push them to the edge of despair, and perhaps, if they survived, to the edge of something far more profound. The fortress felt alive that morning, as if it knew what was coming. Shadows shifted in the corners of her eyes, and the wind whispered of distant dangers. Cale stood beside her, a silent guardian, his eyes stormy and unreadable. Elara took a deep breath. Fear and longing mixed in her chest, a strange, beautiful ache she could not ignore. She was no longer just a bride. She was a fighter, a witness to centuries, and perhaps, in the shadow of the vampire lord, she would find the strength not just to survive, but to love, even when love was forbidden. The morning sun barely pierced the fortress walls, and the world outside was cloaked in a pale mist. Elara stood at the edge of the high balcony, staring at the distant northern valleys where the curse had grown strongest. Rivers had turned red, crops blackened, and smoke rose in thin columns from villages abandoned in fear. She had seen death before, in whispers and reports, but now it felt alive, almost tangible, stretching toward them like a living shadow. Cale appeared silently beside her, as if the mist itself had carried him. His eyes, always so stormy, were darker than usual, weighed down by centuries of knowledge and worry. "They suffer," she whispered, her fingers curling around the balcony stone. "So many people. They do," Cale said, his voice low, but not without warmth. "We can only fight what we can touch, but even small victories matter." Elara turned to him, meeting his gaze. She could feel the tension, the weight of centuries pressing down on him. Yet there was a strange tenderness in the way he looked at her. "Oh, I want to help," she said. "I cannot just stand here." "You already are helping," he replied. "By being here, by surviving, by choosing to fight instead of running. Strength is not always measured by the sword." She nodded, feeling a flicker of courage. She had survived the ritual, she had endured the shadows of the fortress, and she had faced the fear inside herself. But the coming days would test more than courage. They would test trust, heart, and the bond she shared with Cale. Soldiers gathered in the courtyards, their eyes wary, their hands trembling. Magic flowed through the air like a river, invisible but heavy, as Cale instructed the warriors on wards and protections. Elara followed him, absorbing every word, learning what she could of strategy and defense. She realized that survival required more than bravery. It required understanding. As night fell, a messenger arrived, covered in dust and sweat. "The northern villages?" he gasped. "The curse. It has grown. People are disappearing, and shadows move freely outside the towns." Cale's face hardened, the calm mask slipping, revealing the centuries of battles and losses he carried. "Prepare for battle," he ordered. "We leave at first light. Every second wasted will cost lives." Elara felt fear rise like a storm in her chest, but she also felt something else, a strange thrill. She was no longer merely a pawn. She was a participant in history, in the fate of kingdoms and shadows, and she was standing beside Cale, her protector and companion, the immortal whose presence both terrified and comforted her. The journey north was long and treacherous. The wind cut at their faces, and the mist clung to the forests like a living thing. Villages they passed were empty, doors hanging on broken hinges, fires smoldering, and the river's red waters glinting in the pale moonlight. It was as if the world itself had been drained of hope. Alara rode beside KL, trying to steady her nerves. She felt the pull of his presence constantly, a magnetic force she could neither resist nor explain. He rode with ease, sword at his side, eyes constantly scanning the dark forests. And she realized something frightening. She trusted him completely, more than she had trusted anyone in her life. "You are quiet," Kale said suddenly, breaking the silence. His voice was soft but firm, carrying over the creaking of the horse's hooves. I am thinking," she admitted, "about the villages, about the people, about you." She flushed as soon as the words left her mouth. Kale glanced at her, the hint of a frown on his face, but it did not look angry.
About me?
"Yes," she whispered, looking away, "about how you protect them. And me." For a moment, he said nothing. Then he leaned slightly closer, his storm-gray eyes meeting hers. "You should not fear me," he said. "Not me, and not what is coming. Fear weakens, but courage can move mountains." Her heart pounded, a strange warmth spreading through her. She wanted to say more, to confess the swirl of emotions she did not yet understand. But before she could, the forest around them shivered, and a chill ran through the air. The curse was waiting. Shadows rose from the ground, twisting and writhing, as if the earth itself had been poisoned. Figures emerged, faceless and dark, moving toward them with unnatural speed. The soldiers raised their swords, but many faltered, terror breaking their formation. Kale stepped forward, his presence commanding the shadows to pause, to hesitate. He raised his hands, and silver sparks of magic burst into the air, striking the dark creatures with precision. Elora stood beside him, heart racing, and realized that fear would not help. Only action would. She remembered the lessons he had shown her in the training hall, the movements, the awareness, the control over the sword, and she acted, parrying attacks, protecting herself and those near her. Kale's eyes never left hers, guiding, watching, protecting. The battle raged, shadows clashing against steel and magic. Alara's arms ached. Her breath came in short gasps, but she felt alive, sharper and stronger than she had ever known. Kale moved like a storm beside her, protecting, striking, commanding. And in those moments she realized that the bond between them was no longer simple duty. It was trust, unspoken and unbreakable. When the battle ended, the shadows dissipated as suddenly as they had appeared. The northern villages were still broken, still scarred, but the immediate threat had been contained. Alara's hands shook as she dismounted, exhausted but triumphant. Kale approached her, silent and imposing. He looked at her with a storm of emotion, pride, relief, something softer that she could not name. "You did well," he said simply. "You are stronger than I imagined."
Elora looked at him, breathless. "I
"Could not have done it without you." "You would have," he replied, eyes searching hers. "Perhaps not perfectly, perhaps not without fear." But you would have tried, and that is enough. They stood in the cold dawn, the first light glinting on the bloodied ground, the remnants of shadows swirling faintly in the mist, and for a moment time seemed to pause. They were no longer teacher and student, protector and protected. They were equals in the face of a shared danger. That night, they sat by the fire in Cale's chambers, the world outside still shrouded in mist and shadow. The events of the day weighed heavily on them, but for the first time, they allowed themselves a small moment of peace. "You fought bravely," Cale said, breaking the silence. "I underestimated you."
And I underestimated.
What this bond might mean? Elara looked at him, startled. What it might mean? Cale's gaze softened, a rare vulnerability slipping through the storm in his eyes. It is more than duty, more than survival. I feel something I have not felt in centuries, and I do not know what it is, or if I deserve it. Her heart skipped. You think you mean? She hesitated, unsure of the words, unsure if she dared speak them. Cale shook his head slightly, a shadow of a smile on his lips. Perhaps, but it is dangerous to speak of it. The world is not kind to such feelings, especially between mortal and immortal. Alara's chest ached, a strange mix of fear and longing. She wanted to say more, to admit the pull she felt toward him, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she nodded, understanding without speaking. Days turned into weeks. They traveled from village to village, containing the curse where they could, teaching villagers to defend themselves, and building trust in those who had lost hope. With each battle, each challenge, Alara and Cale's bond grew. They shared brief glances in the heat of conflict, quiet words at night, and small gestures of comfort. One night, as they camped in the forest, the stars reflected in the still river nearby, Elara whispered, "Do you ever wish to be mortal?" Cale looked at her, shadows flickering across his features. "Every day," he said softly, "to feel time, to live and age, to hold something fragile and real without fearing its loss. But it is not my choice alone. Perhaps, someday, the curse itself may offer redemption, or perhaps not." Elara reached out, hesitating only briefly before placing her hand on his. It was a simple touch, but it carried all the trust and fear and longing she could not speak aloud. Cale's hand closed over hers, strong and warm, and she felt a strange peace, as if the world itself had paused to witness this fragile connection. And then a messenger arrived, breathless and terrified. "The council," he gasped. "They are coming." "They do not approve. They say, your presence here is dangerous. And that you may be the key to everything falling apart." Elara's stomach tightened. The elders, always watching, always judging, were now moving against them. And Cale's eyes, stormy and unreadable, met hers. "We are not finished yet," he said, voice low. "We will face this together, no matter the cost." Elara nodded, gripping his hand. The bond between them had grown too strong to break, and she realized with certainty that whatever came next, they would face it side by side. The fortress was eerily silent that morning. Even the shadows seemed to hold their breath. Outside, the kingdom still trembled under the weight of the curse. But inside, Kale and Alara prepared for a confrontation they had long anticipated. The council was coming, and their arrival would determine not just the fate of the fortress, but of the bond between mortal and immortal, of love and destiny itself. Alara stood before the grand windows, looking down at the mist-covered forests below. The distant villages were scarred, rivers dark with the curse, smoke rising from fields where life had once thrived. She felt the weight of all she had seen, all she had survived, pressing against her chest. Yet alongside that weight, a strange fire burned. Courage, hope, and a determination she had never known before. Kale approached silently, his storm-gray eyes reflecting the pale light. For centuries he had carried burdens no mortal could imagine. But now, beside her, he seemed almost fragile, human, in a way he had not allowed himself to be for hundreds of years. "You are ready," he said softly, his voice more tender than usual. "The council will test us. They will try to break you, and me. But we endure, together. That is all that matters." Alara met his gaze, her own eyes fierce with determination. "I am ready," she said. "Whatever comes, we face it together." The doors of the fortress opened with a cold, metallic clang. The council entered, robes flowing, faces pale and unforgiving. Their eyes were sharp, scrutinizing every movement, every gesture. They had come not just to judge, but to control, to remind Kale and Alara that power was always dangerous, that bonds between mortal and immortal were unnatural. "You dare defy our warnings?" one elder said, voice echoing through the hall. "Do you not see the danger you bring upon the kingdom? The curse grows stronger with every day you remain united." Alara stepped forward, heart pounding, but voice steady. "We do not seek defiance. We seek survival for the people, for the kingdom. And we will not stand aside while fear dictates our lives." A murmur spread through the council, some offended, others intrigued. Kale's hand rested lightly on the hilt of his sword, but his other hand brushed hers, an unspoken promise of strength and trust. "You overestimate your courage, mortal," another elder said. "This bond you share is dangerous. The curse will consume you both if left unchecked." Kale's eyes flashed, a storm breaking over the calm mask he wore. "And yet we endure," he said, voice like steel. "We are not helpless. And this bond," he looked at Alara, stormy eyes softening just enough, "gives us strength, not weakness." The council's whispers grew louder, tension coiling like a serpent in the room. And then, without warning, the shadows surged. The curse, awakened by fear and anger, manifested fully. Dark forms rose from the floors, twisting and writhing, a living storm of power. Kale moved with precision, controlling the battlefield with a skill only centuries of practice could bring. Magic flared at his fingertips, striking the shadows with silver fire that burned but did not consume. Alara moved beside him, her sword steady in her hands, her courage no longer fragile but tempered like steel. "You must Focus! Kale shouted over the roar of the curse. Fear will destroy you faster than they will. Elara met his gaze, and in that moment, words were unnecessary. Every look, every breath, every motion was a shared rhythm. She struck, defended, guided by his presence, and felt her own power grow. She realized that she was not just surviving. She was shaping the world around her, shaping the outcome of history itself. The shadows surged again, stronger, faster, and Kale's eyes darkened with concentration. He extended his hand toward the center of the hall, magic crackling in the air. Elara, now! He shouted. Her heart raced, but she moved as if guided by instinct. She stepped into the circle of energy, placing her hands over the glowing runes. Power surged through her, the magic of mortal and immortal converging in a brilliant pulse. Shadows screamed, twisting, resisting, but the force of their combined will was unstoppable. For a moment, time seemed to pause. The hall was bathed in blinding light, the energy of their bond filling every corner, every shadow, every soul. And then, silence. The shadows dissolved, evaporating like mist under the morning sun. The curse's presence had been broken, not destroyed entirely, but diminished, restrained, controlled. Elara sank to her knees, exhausted but alive. Kale knelt beside her, his hand gripping hers, grounding her in the reality of survival. The council was silent, watching in awe and disbelief. Some faces were pale with fear, others with respect. Kale stood, extending a hand to Elara. She took it, rising beside him. No longer just a mortal bride, but a partner in power, in courage, in love. You have done the impossible, one elder said finally, voice trembling. The bond, it has controlled the curse, even as we feared it would destroy you. Kale's gaze met hers, and in that storm of gray, there was something unspoken. Trust, relief, and something more profound. Elara realized that she had never seen him like this, fully alive, fully vulnerable, and fully himself. You have my thanks, Kale said quietly, turning to the council. But this bond is ours, and it cannot be judged, threatened, or undone by fear. We will protect the kingdom together. The elders nodded reluctantly, understanding that their warnings had been heeded and surpassed. The world outside was not safe. The curse still lingered, but it had been tempered by courage, by trust, and by the bond of mortal and immortal. Later, Kale led Elara to the highest tower of the fortress. The morning sun spilled across the kingdom, illuminating rivers, forests, and villages with golden light. For the first time, Elara saw the land not as cursed, but as beautiful, resilient, and alive. You have changed everything, Kale said softly, standing close enough that she could feel his warmth. Not just the curse, not just the kingdom, but me. You have saved me, Kale, more than once. He shook his head, a faint smile breaking through the stormy mask. No, he said. We saved each other. You have courage I have not seen in centuries. And you have opened a part of me I thought was lost forever. Their hands touched, fingers intertwining, the world narrowing to the two of them, to this fragile moment of peace amidst centuries of darkness. The fortress was silent, the shadows resting, the curse restrained, and for the first time, Elara felt a true sense of hope. The days that followed were gentle, almost surreal. Kale and Elara traveled to the villages, helping repair the damage, teaching the villagers to protect themselves, and showing them that the bond between mortal and immortal could bring not fear, but life, hope, and courage. Every day, their trust deepened, their bond strengthened, and the unspoken tension between them transformed into something beautiful, a mutual understanding that went beyond words. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with crimson and gold, Elara and Kale stood together in the fortress garden. The black roses and silver leaves shimmered in the fading light, and the air was still, as if the world itself had paused to witness this moment. "You are mortal now," Kale said softly, his storm-gray eyes meeting hers. "But the bond, it will always remain. Stronger than fear, stronger than the curse, stronger than time itself." Hilara's chest swelled with emotion. "And you are no longer bound by the curse. You have chosen to be here, with me." He nodded, a rare vulnerability in his expression. "I have chosen life, and I have chosen you." For a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them. The centuries of pain, loneliness, and fear melted away, replaced by something timeless, enduring, and profound. And then, as the first stars appeared in the sky, they stood together, hands intertwined, hearts aligned, and the fortress, once a place of shadows, felt like a home forged in courage, trust, and love. The curse was not gone entirely, but it no longer ruled them. The bond between mortal and immortal had tempered the shadows, and the world, though still fragile, was alive with possibility. Kale leaned close, whispering in a voice that carried both tenderness and promise, "Whatever comes next, we face it together, always." Always. The fortress, the kingdom, and the shadows beyond the forests all seemed to breathe with them. The bond had been tested, the curse confronted, and the impossible had been achieved. And in the quiet aftermath, one truth remained unshakable: love, courage, and trust could conquer even the darkest of forces. They were no longer merely survivor and protector. They were equals, partners, and something more. A bond forged in darkness, tempered in fire, and reborn in crimson light. The story of mortal and immortal had reached its crescendo, and as dawn broke over Eldoria, the kingdom was not merely safe, it was alive, radiant, and waiting for the future to be written.